They tore down my greenhouse while I was out of town for 48 hours. By the time I got back, 15 years of my life was scattered across the dirt like broken ice. And the worst part was not the wreckage, not even the money. It was the note they left behind, like they thought they were doing me a favor. I live just outside a town called Marston Ridge, about an hour north of Austin. My family has owned this land since my granddad came back from Vietnam and decided he was done taking orders from anybody. 128 acres of Texas soil, mostly flat, some gentle roll to it, good sun, stubborn clay underneath if you dig too deep. It is not glamorous land, but it is honest land. I raise vegetables, rotate a little hay, lease out part of the back pasture for cattle some seasons. It has always been enough. About 16 years ago, my wife Claire and I built the greenhouse. We did not hire contractors. We poured the footings ourselves, set the frame in July heat that made the air ripple, argued about measurements, laughed about it later. It started small, just a way to extend the growing season, but over time it became the heart of the farm. Heirloom tomatoes in winter, herbs year-round, specialty greens for a couple of restaurants in town, and enough surplus that we donated boxes to the church pantry every month. That greenhouse was more than glass and steel. It was early mornings with coffee in hand, condensation sliding down panels, while Claire hummed old country songs. It was the place I went after she passed 3 years ago, just to stand there and feel like something steady still existed. Now picture me pulling up the gravel drive on a Sunday evening, truck dusty from a fishing trip with my brother, already thinking about what I needed to harvest Monday morning. I round the bend past the pecan trees, and something feels wrong. There is too much sky. I actually slowed down because my brain could not make sense of it. Where the greenhouse should have been, there was nothing but twisted ribs of metal and glittering shards spread across dark soil. The automatic vents lay crushed like soda cans. The irrigation lines were ripped out of the ground. For a second, I honestly thought maybe a tornado had skipped through just that one spot. We get strange weather out here. Then I saw the skid steer tracks. Clean, deliberate tread marks. Human destruction, not wind. I parked, got out, and just stood there. No yelling. No dramatic collapse to my knees. Just this tight pressure in my chest like someone had cinched a strap around my ribs. I walked over slowly, boots crunching on glass, and that is when I saw the bright orange paper stapled to one of the bent beams. Notice of removal. Non-compliant agricultural structure. Violation of community environmental standards. At the bottom was the name of the homeowners association from the new development bordering my south fence line. Silverbrook Estates. And signed beneath it, in confident blue ink, was the name of their board president, Victor Langford. Silverbrook had been built about 5 years back. Big stucco houses, artificial ponds, a little clubhouse with columns trying real hard to look Southern historic. They marketed it as luxury country living, which I found funny considering they built it right up against an actual working farm. But folks move where they move. At first, we got along fine enough. A few residents would come by and buy produce. Kids would press against the fence and watch the tractors. But over time, the board started sending letters. Complaints about early morning equipment noise. About the smell when we turned compost. About dust during harvest. I responded politely every time. Farming is not quiet. Soil has a smell. Wind carries dust. I had been there decades before their gated entrance ever existed. Usually the letters stopped after a lawyer from town reminded them of county right to farm laws. But this was different. I read that notice 3 times, then walked the perimeter of the wreckage. The greenhouse had sat entirely on my property, a good 300 yards from the shared boundary. There was no dispute about that. I had the survey maps in a file cabinet in my office. My neighbor Eli from the north side must have heard the engine because he drove his ATV over. He took one look and let out a low whistle. Who did this? I handed him the notice. He shook his head slow. You gonna call the sheriff? Oh yeah, I said. I am absolutely calling the sheriff. The deputy came out within the hour. Took photos. Measured distances. He did not say much, but I could tell from the way his jaw tightened that this was not going to be a small matter. Private property destruction is still private property destruction, even if you live behind decorative gates. That night, after everyone left and the sun dropped behind the live oaks, I sat on the tailgate of my truck staring at what used to be the center of my world. I should have been furious. Instead, I felt hollow. Then the anger came in waves. Not just because they tore it down, but because they assumed they could. They assumed a farmer would not fight back, that I would grumble, maybe threaten, then eventually accept some half-hearted settlement. They assumed their property values mattered more than my livelihood. What they did not understand was this. The greenhouse was not just sitting there by coincidence. It had been built directly over the primary irrigation control hub for the lower half of my land. Years ago, when Silverbrook was first being developed, their contractors approached me about access to the aquifer line that runs beneath my property. The easiest route for their decorative water features tied into the main pump station that I already maintained. We negotiated an agreement. They paid a one-time infrastructure fee and signed a usage contract that gave them water flow through my system, but ownership and operational control remained mine. The pump house, the filters, the pressure regulators, all of it sat on my land, under a locked steel door only I had keys to. For 5 years, I never had a reason to think about it. Water flowed. Their fountain sparkled. Their pond stayed full. Their little golf green looked like something out of a brochure. Sitting there in the dark, looking at the wreckage of my greenhouse, I realized something very simple. The irrigation lines they ripped out when they bulldozed that structure were not decorative. They were connected to everything. I stood up, brushed dirt off my jeans, and walked toward the pump house. If they wanted to test how much power a farmer had, I figured it was time they found out. The pump house sits about 50 yards behind where the greenhouse used to be, a squat concrete building with a tin roof and a heavy steel door that still has my granddad's old padlock hanging from it. Most people would drive right past it and never think twice. It is not impressive. It does not sparkle, but it is the quiet center of everything that grows on my land, and apparently, everything that stayed green in Silverbrook. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was cooler in there, humming faintly with the steady rhythm of the primary pump. Pressure gauges lined the wall, little needles sitting comfortably in the green zone. Through the main manifold ran 2 primary branches, one feeding my irrigation grid, the other feeding the line that extended south under the fence and into their subdivision. For a long moment, I just stood there listening to the hum. I am not a reckless man. I do not act without thinking it through. My granddad used to say, "Never pull a lever you are not prepared to live with after it is pulled." So I thought about Claire. I thought about the years we spent building that greenhouse. I thought about the check stubs from the restaurants waiting on winter greens. I thought about the orange notice flapping in the breeze over broken steel. Then I reached for the secondary valve that controlled outbound flow to Silverbrook. I did not slam it shut. I turned it slowly, deliberately, feeling the resistance shift as pressure rerouted back into my own grid. The gauge for their line dipped, hovered, then settled at 0. The hum of the pump changed pitch slightly, lighter now. I locked the pump house and went back to the truck. I slept better that night than I expected. The first call came the next afternoon. It was a woman I recognized, Denise Harper, who lived near the artificial pond on their east side. She used to buy basil from us in the summer. "Hey, Daniel," she said, voice tight. "Is something wrong with the water? Our fountain is not running." I kept my tone even. "You might want to talk to your HOA board about that." There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means the line feeding your subdivision runs through my property. And until we resolve an issue, it is turned off." Another pause, longer this time. "Daniel, they said your structure violated community standards." I looked out the window at twisted metal catching afternoon light. It did not violate county law, and it sure as hell did not violate my property line. She exhaled slowly. "I will talk to Victor." By evening, I had 3 more calls. Confusion mostly. A little edge creeping in. I repeated the same line to each of them. "Talk to your board." Day 1 without water, their fountains sputtered dry. The little streams that ran between landscaped rocks became trickles, then nothing. I drove the perimeter fence at sunset and watched residents walking around their ponds, hands on hips, staring at mud creeping inward from the edges. Day 2, the real impact started. Silverbrook had built their image around lush landscape. Imported sod, young magnolias, decorative reeds along the water. Without constant irrigation, that Texas sun does not take long to remind you who is in charge. By mid-afternoon, I could see the grass dulling from deep green to tired olive. That evening, Victor Langford showed up at my gate. He did not come alone. He drove a black SUV that probably cost more than my tractor, and he brought 2 other board members with him, a man named Colin and a woman named Marissa, who always looked like she was perpetually annoyed by the existence of dust. I met them at the gate, leaning against the fence post. Victor did not bother with it. Turn the water back on, he said, like he was ordering room service. I tilted my head. That is not how this works. He glanced past me at the farm, then back. You are intentionally damaging property values in Silverbrook. We have reports of ponds dropping by the hour. Landscaping is dying. You intentionally destroyed my greenhouse, I replied. We have reports of that too. From the sheriff. His jaw tightened. That structure violated our environmental standards. It was an eyesore. The glare alone was. It was 300 yards from your fence, Victor. On my land. Built 15 years ago. Marissa stepped forward. The reflection posed a hazard to drivers along the southern bend of our internal road. I almost laughed. Your internal road that sits entirely on your property? You are welcome to plant taller trees. Colin tried a different angle. Look, Daniel, this does not need to escalate. We can discuss compensation, but you cannot just cut off essential utilities. I straightened. Essential utilities that you access through my infrastructure under a usage agreement. One that requires mutual respect and compliance with state property law. You broke that first. Victor's voice sharpened. If you think you can strong-arm us. Strong-arm you? I interrupted. You sent heavy equipment onto my land without permission and leveled a working structure. That is not strong-arming. That is trespass and destruction. For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind picked up dust along the drive. Finally, Victor said, "What do you want?" I met his eyes. Accountability. He scoffed. Be serious. I am serious. You rebuild my greenhouse at your expense. You compensate me for lost crops and contract disruptions. And we renegotiate the water agreement. Marissa crossed her arms. You are extorting us. No, I said calmly. I am responding proportionally. They left without another word. By day 3, the weather shifted. A dry front moved in from the west, bringing gusty winds. Normally, their irrigated lawns would anchor the topsoil along their graded lots. Without moisture, the ground began to loosen. That afternoon, I drove into town for feed and past the main entrance to Silverbrook. Even from the highway, I could see a haze hanging over the rooftops. Later, Eli called me laughing. You seen this? He asked. Seen what? He told me to check the local community Facebook page. Someone had posted a video. It showed one of Silverbrook's pristine cul-de-sacs with dust devils spinning across driveways, coating white SUVs in a fine layer of tan powder. Kids were running inside, covering their faces. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not a resident. It was a reporter from the Marston County Ledger. Mr. Reyes, she said, we received aerial photographs of Silverbrook showing significant environmental degradation. We understand there is a dispute involving irrigation access. Would you care to comment? I had sent those photos that morning, taken by a buddy of mine who flies drones for real estate listings. I kept my statement measured. There was an unlawful destruction of property on my farm. Until that matter is resolved, I am exercising my legal rights regarding infrastructure located on my land. The story ran online before midnight. Day 4 was chaos. Insurance adjusters started showing up at Silverbrook's gate. Landscapers scrambled to truck in emergency water. But you cannot just spray a few lawns and expect an entire engineered ecosystem to recover. Their ponds had dropped low enough to expose ugly plastic liners beneath the decorative rocks. The little golf green they bragged about in brochures turned patchy and brown. Wind carried loose soil across their manicured sidewalks. Social media did the rest. By late afternoon, I received a certified letter from their attorneys threatening injunctions. I forwarded it straight to my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla Nguyen who had represented my family before. She called me within the hour. Daniel, she said, I have reviewed the original water agreement. They are in breach due to documented trespass and destruction. You are within your rights to suspend service pending resolution. But be prepared. They will escalate. I looked out at the empty skeleton of my greenhouse. I am not the one who started this. I know, she replied. Just make sure you are ready to finish it. That evening, as the sun dipped red through a haze of dust drifting north from Silverbrook, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Control. Not spite. Not even revenge, exactly. Just the quiet understanding that for once, the power dynamic had shifted. But Victor Langford was not a man used to losing control, and I had a feeling he was about to make that very clear. By the end of that first week, Silverbrook did not look like the glossy brochure they used to mail out every spring. It looked tired. The ponds had receded far enough that the edges cracked in spiderweb patterns. The reeds along the banks drooped like overcooked spaghetti. Their grand entrance fountain, the one with the fake limestone tiers, stood silent, streaked with mineral stains that had never been meant to show. And the wind just kept coming. Out here, when land dries out, it does not politely stay put. It lifts. It travels. It reminds you that everything green is temporary without stewardship. I had spent my whole life understanding that balance. Silverbrook had spent 5 years pretending it did not apply to them. Victor called again on day 6. His voice was different this time. Less command, more strain. "We need to meet," he said. I agreed to meet at the fence line the next morning. When I got there, he was already waiting. No SUV this time, just his truck. He looked like he had not slept much. His once crisp polo was wrinkled, dust clinging to the cuffs. Behind him, through the open gate of their subdivision, I could see landscaping crews spraying water from tanker trucks in a losing battle against physics. He did not start with threats. "The board is under pressure," he said. "Residents are furious. Some are talking about legal action against us." I leaned against the fence post. Actions tend to have consequences. He exhaled. "We should not have sent the crew without final mediation." That was as close to an apology as I was going to get. "Should not have," I repeated. "But you did." He nodded once. "Yes, we did." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind carried a swirl of dust between us, settling on the fence rails like fine powder. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. I laid them out again, slow and clear. "You rebuild my greenhouse. Not the same size. Double the square footage. Steel frame rated for higher wind loads. Tempered glass. Automated venting upgraded. You cover every dollar. You compensate me for lost crops, projected revenue from my restaurant contracts, and replacement of damaged irrigation lines. You sign a revised water agreement. Annual compensation, indexed to usage. An explicit acknowledgement that infrastructure on my land is not subject to your board's aesthetic opinions." He listened without interrupting. "And," I added, "the board issues a written statement admitting fault for unlawful trespass and destruction. Publicly." That last one hit him. "You want us to humiliate ourselves." I shrugged. "You humiliated me first. Difference is, I am not hiding behind a gated entrance." He rubbed his face with both hands. "This will cost us a fortune." I looked past him at the brown sweep of what used to be emerald lawn. "So did bulldozing 15 years of my life." He asked for 48 hours. I did not turn the water back on. Those 2 days were the worst for Silverbrook. Word had spread beyond town. A regional news station picked up the story, running drone footage of their shrinking ponds alongside interviews about property rights and right to farm laws. Comment sections lit up with people taking sides. Some called me vindictive. Others called me a hero. I did not feel like either. I felt tired. On the second evening, Eli came over with a 6-pack, and we sat on the tailgate again, just like the night I found the wreckage. "You ever think about just selling and moving somewhere quieter?" he asked. I stared at the outline where the greenhouse used to cast shade at dusk. "Maybe, but then I would just be leaving the lesson half taught." He chuckled. "You always did have a stubborn streak." "I call it boundaries," I said. The next morning, Victor returned. This time he carried a folder. "We accept your terms," he said. Everyone. Everyone." He handed me a draft agreement prepared by their attorneys. Carla had already reviewed a copy that morning and marked her revisions in red. They had conceded more quickly than I expected, probably because their insurance carriers were breathing down their necks and homeowners were threatening recall elections. The public statement went out that afternoon. It was carefully worded, but it admitted that the board had acted without proper legal authority in authorizing removal of a structure located entirely on adjacent private property. I read it twice, feeling something unclench in my chest that I did not realize had been tight. Construction began within the week. I did not turn the water back on immediately. For 2 more weeks, Silverbrook hauled in water by truck. Their residents endured dusty sidewalks and half-dead lawns. The board held tense meetings in their clubhouse, while homeowners demanded resignations. 2 board members stepped down before the new greenhouse foundation was even poured. When the steel frame finally rose from fresh concrete, taller and broader than the original, I walked the perimeter slowly. It felt strange seeing something familiar reborn larger, stronger. Claire would have liked the upgrades, I thought. She always said if you were going to fix something, fix it better than it was before. On the day the last pane of tempered glass was installed, Victor met me at the pump house. He did not say much, just nodded toward the door. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and for the first time in weeks placed my hand on the valve feeding Silverbrook. You understand? I said without looking at him. This is not about punishment anymore. It is about respect. He swallowed. Understood. I turned the valve slowly. The gauge needle climbed, steady and sure. The pump's hum deepened, pressure equalizing through the line. Within minutes, somewhere beyond the fence, a fountain sputtered, then roared back to life. We walked outside. In the distance, I could hear faint cheers drifting from their entrance. Victor extended his hand. I shook it. From that day forward, a check arrived every month like clockwork. Annual compensation for water access, just as the new agreement specified. No more letters about dust. No more complaints about smell. When their residents wanted fresh produce, they came to the farm stand and paid like everyone else. The new greenhouse thrived. Double the space meant I expanded into specialty peppers and winter citrus experiments. I hired 2 local kids part-time, taught them about soil health and patience. Standing inside that larger structure on cool mornings, sunlight diffused through glass, I sometimes catch myself expecting to hear Claire humming again. People still bring up the story when they see me in town. Some say I went too far, that I could have resolved it in court without letting an entire neighborhood dry out. Others say I taught a necessary lesson about power and entitlement. The truth sits somewhere in between. Did I enjoy watching their fountains run dry? Not exactly. But I will admit there was a certain clarity in seeing cause and effect play out so plainly. You cannot bulldoze someone's livelihood and expect the earth to keep cooperating with you like nothing happened. Silverbrook still stands. Lawns are green again. Property values recovered. Life moved on. But every now and then, when the wind kicks up and carries a thin veil of dust across the southern fence line, I notice residents glance toward my fields with a little more awareness than before. They know now that beneath their manicured streets runs a line that begins on land they do not control. And I know that sometimes, the only way to be heard is not by shouting, but by turning a valve and letting silence do the talking. So here's what I want to ask you. Was I wrong to hold the line as long as I did? Should I have turned the water back on the moment they agreed to rebuild? Or was it necessary for them to feel the full weight of their decision before things could truly reset? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more than you think. And if you have ever dealt with an overreaching HOA, a land dispute, or a moment where you had to decide between keeping the peace and standing your ground, share that too. These stories matter because communities only work when respect runs both directions. If this one stuck with you, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. There are more stories about land, lines, and the quiet ways ordinary people push back. Sometimes the biggest battles are not fought in courtrooms. Sometimes they are fought with patience, paperwork, and a single turn of a valve.